Hi, Anthony. How are you doing?
Good. Yourself?
Same here. Thank you so much, Anthony, for accepting my request to join this Cloud 520 session. I've been doing this session for a few months now, getting a lot of feedback from local community especially, and I'm trying my best to get best resources from Microsoft community to share knowledge with our local community. So that is the intention behind this program. So before going to our topic, shall we start off with a quick introduction?
Yeah, sure. So Anthony Bartolo, I'm a senior cloud advocate with Microsoft. I've been at Microsoft for 10 years. I've done a numerous amount of roles. A lot of the projects that we're talking about today, I used to be part of an engineering SWAT team that would go in and work with customers to do proof of concepts, implementations. I thought it would be a great way to share stories on, what we've done with the technology specific to IoT and even artificial intelligence, including machine learning, cognitive services, and what have you. And then if it's okay with you, I'm actually going to share all the GitHub repos from all the projects that we've completed so that others, your viewers, can take advantage of the code that was created to incorporate, the technologies made forth by Microsoft.
Yeah, so Anthony, yes, absolutely. I think that would be great because three types of audience watching our show, especially developers, IT professionals, and even business decision makers. So why someone should use an IoT platform like Azure?
Yep. So from an IoT perspective, what Microsoft has done with their Azure IoT Central offering is the availability to package your solutions. You go out, you grab a Raspberry Pi, you do some testing, whether it be monitoring of water levels, monitoring of your pet's feeding habits, you name it, right? You can pretty much test out anything with a Raspberry Pi, and having that availability in regards to capturing that data, what do you do with it at that point? What is the next step? And then even from the perspective of how do I ensure that the software that I've written for this Raspberry Pi is always kept up to date? If I have to push out, new revisions of it, how do I push it out securely to this device? And then what happens if the device, a hacker or someone with malicious intent goes in and circumvents the security on the device itself? How do I, go forward and plan for all this? And this is, what Microsoft is trying to do is take the guesswork out of this by the creation of tools like IoT Central that has the full-on package solution. So if you're doing an industrial deployment for machinery, there is a template that you can implement that will take away a lot of the guesswork in terms of the creation of architecture to get this deployed. Or if you're building a solution from scratch and you want to do it, piece by piece, you do it through IoT Central and then bolt on the solutions that are made available in terms of security, data transport, BIOS or software upgrades to the devices themselves, and then even the transport routes as to where the data is going. It makes things easier for your deployment to really capitalize on your ideas for IoT without, scratching your head and a lot of guesswork in terms of how do I deploy this, how do I secure this. I wouldn't say it's plug and play just yet, but it is something that Microsoft is moving towards in terms of a plug and play architecture for IoT.
Anthony, I know there are lots of services, platforms available on top of Azure. So why we have large number of services available? Are we targeting different types of users, different type of industries? Tell us a little bit about those functionalities, those services available on Azure and when to use them.
Yeah, actually, if I can, I'll actually show you why it's so important to have everything connected. I'm just giving you one quick second here. All right, let me know when you can see my screen.
Can see it now.
Yeah, so this is one of the first projects that I worked on IoT. This was my first implementation of IoT at Microsoft, actually. And this is the exact reason why there are so many services on Azure and why it's important when you're looking for an IoT solution. It's something that's not just IoT. It's something that provides you that I'm starting here and I'm going to grow to this. And I'll show you why this is so important. So this was my first project. This was the mousetrap project that myself and a team put together in 48 hours. And all it was is we took a Raspberry Pi and connected it to a mousetrap. And so, we did an understanding of, this is the opportunity in automating the ability to catch mice. And all we wanted to do in this instance was $2 mousetrap, connecting it to a Raspberry Pi. When the trap went off, it closed the circuit, which would notify the Raspberry Pi that a mouse had been caught. As you can see, it's like literally aluminum foil on the mousetrap itself as the conductor. When the trap had gone off, all it would do is it would notify the pest control company. It would be proactive in saying, hey, the trap is full. Prior to, the pest control company would, drive around on a scheduled basis and go to specific locations to empty out these mouse traps. Now the mousetrap was being intelligent and saying, hey, I've caught a mouse, come clean me out, right? Now, why Azure, and all the services made available in IoT, that was the baseline. That was the beginning. What we quickly realized was the amount of information that was capturing from we had the potential to capture from the mousetrap being made available through the Raspberry Pi included, geographical location inside of the building, outside in the real world, the temperature, where the mousetrap was, if it was light or dark, how long until the mousetrap itself was cleaned out by the pest control company. All this information could be captured, and we started to feed this information into machine learning. Machine learning, that whole ability to digest data on your behalf based on the result that you want as an outcome. And that availability then allowed us to do mapping of where's the best places to place the mouse traps to catch the most mice, right? So to your question, in terms of all the services that are made available, it's that whole availability of, I start with IoT in my plan, and my base level is just for it reporting that it's caught a mouse. But with the platform Azure as a whole, the availability to then extend and grow that offering into something that's much more robust, that does a lot more, and I still have the ability to grow and continue this solution. So as an example, with the addition of machine learning to the IoT solution, I've been able to take that same architecture and extend it to do you have these in Sri Lanka? These are our newspaper boxes that we have in Toronto, and you literally go up, you put $1.50 in the box, and you get a newspaper, right? So it's a newspaper vending machine. Mm-hmm. And so with the mousetrap solution, instead of a mousetrap going off, what we have here is there's a scale inside of the newspaper box. It captures the same information in terms of geographical where the newspaper boxes are located, and light and dark in terms of day and night. And this, on the street corner, somebody comes up to it, puts $1.50 in, and they buy a newspaper. It unlocks and they get a newspaper. And so now the newspaper company can actually track to say, hey, if we put the box here, based on the sales patterns that are being captured through IoT and put it into machine learning, I'll sell that much more newspapers because it's here. It'll predict geographically where's the best places to put the newspaper boxes. Another solution we extended the mousetrap solution or architecture to was to local police, in terms of every time the siren goes on, that's the trigger. And that's in essence in IoT what starts the sequence of instructions that occur. So in this scenario here, when the siren goes on, it then captures that same data geographically. Where did the siren go on, and is it light or dark outside? And then does the same predictability in terms of, your law services will be needed in these certain areas based on the data that's been provided, so that police can be more proactive in terms of their cruising of neighborhoods, as opposed to just, I'm going to go here in the morning and I'm going to go here in the afternoon, right? Again, based on that same architecture, and the ability for it to evolve to adopt to these types of solutions is because the fact on the Azure platform, it's not just IoT in a box and you connect these devices and away you go. It's this full flow of availability of services that can connect into your data endpoints, which your IoT devices are, to invoke these type of solutions.
So Anthony, one question came to my mind when you explain in this scenario. That is kind of an interesting use. Now, you are coming from a deep technical background, right? You were telling a little bit about yourself. So there may be, a student who really want to get themselves, hands-on on these areas. They really want to become IoT engineers. But I mean, what are the insights or inputs you can provide here? I mean, do they really want to have that, hardware level knowledge, that embedded technologies with them to enter this area, or how they should begin their career?
So I would actually, if you have a passion for IoT and you want to, start your journey in terms of, learning and getting the baselines done, I learn by hands-on. That's, the best way that I learn in regards to just testing and playing with opportunities in terms of IoT, buying a Raspberry Pi, buying, an IoT unit, and just starting from there. I've actually, I'm currently on the Jetson Nano, which is this device here. This allows me to do cognitive services, specifically custom vision. And I'm working on a demo on this right now, which we'll talk about a little bit more in a sec. But the real thing to get started is to get hands-on. So a couple things. Work with your local organizations or local companies. If you have a nonprofit that you can work with in terms that are looking for an IoT solution, that for me was the best. In doing these projects really elevated my game in terms of IoT. When you're then, okay, now I'm comfortable with this and I want to start learning about the specific platform on Azure IoT and then build up my certification, which there is actually a certification made available for Azure IoT offering. The best place to start is Microsoft Learn. And the reason why, for me, again, it's a hands-on service, right? So I can go in, I go to microsoft.com/learn. There's the availability of the services that I can then dabble on for IoT specifically. There's numerous aspects in terms of device setup, device connectivity to IoT Hub, device connectivity to IoT Central, pathing of the data, where the data is to go in terms of digestion into machine learning or into storage or wherever the data should go at that time. There's a plethora of labs and modules that you can go through. Everything from understanding the logic of IoT's or Azure IoT offering, right down to hands-on. I'm now going to take this Raspberry Pi and deploy it to IoT Hub, and here's the steps to accomplish this. And what's really good about this offering is it's completely free. So Microsoft Learn, what it does is it utilizes sandbox technology for you to connect your devices or you to parse your data from your IoT devices or your endpoints through a step-by-step scenario lab. Made available right on Azure in a sandbox at no charge to you. And the benefit of that is that you're actually dabbling with the technology without incurring a cost. And once you've completed the labs itself and you've logged out of the lab, it actually wipes the sandbox clean. So your data no longer resides there and you move on to the next module or next lesson. You do also have the ability to, once you've created the steps and you parsed out code, in some instances you would have to code software onto a Raspberry Pi, you can then take that and then save it in your repository, post it up in your GitHub repo, what have you, for you to use at a later date in production, right? So it's not just once you've done all that work, it's gone. You can extract that work that you've accomplished and then store it somewhere for future use. The one thing I did want to touch on really quickly too, in terms of your upskilling, is I see myself as an IT professional. I come from, back in the day, did my certification on Windows Server 2003, built out my knowledge up to Azure, but I'm not a traditional coder. I don't, I do dabble in Visual Studio Code. I'm not a developer. I don't see myself as a developer. I do see myself as a solutions architect. And, for those that are on the IT pro space, I'm not saying, let's convert IT pros into developers. That's not what I'm saying at all. What I'm saying is if you have a passion for it and you have a passion to enable these types of data points and these types of capturing of data, there's so many opportunities, especially in IoT, for IT professionals to extend their capabilities and their craft to really capitalize on what IoT brings to the table in terms of data capture and its connectivity to your architecture for the data being captured and for the data to be used in ways like machine learning for predictability. So definitely, Microsoft Learn would be your best first start once you feel comfortable around the whole premise of IoT to start.
Yeah, and I think you touch upon a lot of valid points, especially on Microsoft Learn. I think one biggest challenge when someone is trying to gain cloud knowledge through following online courses and all, one biggest challenge they were facing was whether they want to sign up for a trial account, then they get $200 or $100, which will which they have to consume within 30 days. Then after 30 days, they cannot create another one with the same credit card. Lot of challenges, right? I think Microsoft has came up with this Microsoft, Microsoft Learn, the labs, whatever the things available inside the platform, without even moving out from the browser. As you correctly mentioned, they can simply follow the guidelines and complete those labs.
I've actually got a collection. So I've gone forward into Microsoft Learn, and I've specifically grabbed for this conversation a grouping of all the IoT labs that are available inside of Microsoft Learn, again, for free. So if your audience goes to aka.ms/MS Learn IoT, you will get direct access in Microsoft Learn to all the IoT specific modules that goes over everything from IoT devices deployment, security, to data paths for where your data goes. And like I said, all hands-on, all completely free, all sandboxed, ability to extract the code or extract the practices that were accomplished for later use, but no data resides after the labs have been done.
So security is one key consideration when it comes to IoT. So how Microsoft unblock IoT innovations with the confidence of security?
So again, Microsoft wants to take away the guesswork of your deployment of IoT, right? And so security is a big one because you have the ability to utilize protocols like MQTT for the secure transport of your data. But we know, these devices on the edge that are capturing data, they're, hardware hackers can come by and try to circumvent the devices in terms of the OS that's running on them, or, those that are pinging remotely of all these devices that are on the edge, trying to inject code. We're in a situation where, currency now is your data. So your data has become the new currency, and everybody wants access to it for whatever reason, whether it be malicious or competitive or what have you. And so in your deployment of IoT, there are a plethora of security solutions made available because there isn't just one. There's so many because of the fact that in some aspects you have to adhere to standards or ISO certifications, or based on your industry. So healthcare, legal, finance. There are different requirements in terms of security, which also apply to your IoT deployment. In regards to the data itself, when you're connecting it to an IoT hub or IoT central, there are the baseline inherent security properties that are made available in terms of data and transport, data at rest, in terms of security spec. When you want to go that much deeper, there are solutions that incorporate Azure Active Directory certificates that are used in a solution called Azure Sphere, which enable the functionality of on your IoT device that you've now created for production. So this is not a Raspberry Pi. This would be a self-made, or you've asked a third party to build out an IoT device for you for your specific deployment. You can include an actual chipset into the IoT offering that will receive a certificate from Azure Active Directory as a service on the device itself. This then authenticates with Azure AD, or in essence Azure Sphere, to say, I validate that I am the device that is deployed, and I'll validate that the software that's running on this device is the appropriate software. Should somebody, maliciously go in and attack this device specifically, then what would happen is it would self-heal itself. It'll actually take itself offline, stop capturing data. It will verify, am I running the proper OS BIOS on this device with Azure Sphere? Azure Sphere will come back and say, well, no, you're not running the proper implementation. Let me push to you what software you should be running on this device, and self-remediate that issue or that hack that's occurred on this device back to the default as to what it should be running, and then go back on its merry way, capturing that data securely again. And that's the top end. That's the most extreme in terms of security properties that a lot of organizations have adopted thus far. Again, specifically in industries that require that type of implementation. Taking a step back, there's even what we call just-in-time configuration, which if you've dabbled in Azure governance, you know that just-in-time is the ability to invoke least level access that is required in terms of data capture. In just-in-time scenario, you can actually limit the amount of access that is available to these IoT devices, making the attack vector a lot smaller on the IoT devices itself. And thus, the individuals that have access to these devices, or services that have access to these devices for data capture, only have the ability to perform a specific task that's been governed by just-in-time access, as opposed to just a carte blanche, full access to this device, manipulate anything you want. I just want to have or give individuals or services access to just the data coming in and nothing else. And you can do that with just-in-time configuration.
Any supported IoT platform services on Azure Stack? Because in Sri Lanka also we have one Azure Stack with one of our key telcos. So anything there?
Yeah, edge computing is a hot topic right now because of the fact that you're taking the reams and reams of raw data and doing calculations on the edge and then having that result captured, which also saves a lot of money and time in terms of the deduction of whatever outcome you want to accomplish. So in Azure Stack, there is the availability for IoT Hub to be run natively inside of Azure Stack. But what I would argue is the ability to even make the device itself on the edge intelligent. The solution I was talking to you about before with my Jetson Nano, with a similar type of device, what we actually did was we made drones intelligent on behalf of the Canadian Coast Guard in partnership with a third-party company that went forward and did a deployment that made drones self-aware when identified life jackets in the water. The reason was so important was because the fact that the drones were 3 hours out at sea. There was no connectivity to any data stream made available. So there was no way for this drone to capture information and feed it back to a central office. It had to make its deduction right there and then. And so building out the intelligence on the drone itself was a challenge. The whole availability of solutions that allow for self-awareness and self-intelligence on the edge as programmed by us, using the custom vision platform as the example, what we were able to do is, through 5,000 hours of teaching custom vision services, we were able to, with I think it was about 73% accuracy, detect a life jacket in the water, have the drone detect a life jacket in the water and do a capture of environmentals. This is right on the drone itself without any connectivity back to connectivity back to Azure for that availability of understanding what it's looking at. At that point, making a decision, okay, so I've detected there's a life jacket. I need to run back to the coverage area so that I can then report to my central office that I detected this situation. So that was, done through the 5,000 hours of learning, the export of an Onyx file, which is a logic file, which is then embedded into the code of the drone itself directly, using the optics of the drone to understand what it's looking at and to make that, deduction that I need to get support or help immediately because there's individuals that are in the water that can contract hypothermia at X amount of minutes or hours or whatever that may be. That well above and beyond just, the Azure Stack piece, we've now evolved to, instead of having a hub be the intelligence, having the devices themselves be the intelligence, and making them have the ability to make decisions on their own. But, to your point, if you have a collection of devices that are, dumb devices that don't have intelligence and they want to connect back to a hub and it has to be on premises, Azure Stack solution coupled with Azure IoT running on Azure Stack is a viable solution that will do pretty much almost everything that you can do on on the Azure offering of IoT Hub and IoT Central. Obviously, there are some limitations because your deployment would be on premises, but there would still be a tether back to Azure itself in regards to data transport. Now, for those that are deploying IoT solutions and require on-premises implementation, if Azure Stack is not something that's viable for your organization, you do also have the availability to have the endpoints of your or your IoT devices connected to Azure IoT Hub and have the data reside on premises, let's say in a SQL server or a database of your choosing on premises, if that's a requirement that you also have as well. So it's not just you can only do Azure Stack for your on-premises implementation of IoT. You can use the cloud-based version of IoT Hub directly into Azure and still have your data at rest reside on premises, which has been ratified for a lot of industries as something that can be used as practice.
Anthony, thank you so much for your sharings. What do you like to show us on your demo? I know you have spent a lot of time on preparing a demo for the program.
So actually what I want to share is I'm going to take you through the steps in terms of how we made the drones intelligent and we're gonna walk through the process in terms of this availability. And not only am I going to share the code with you in terms of how we accomplish this, I've actually taken the code and I've expanded it beyond just the drone implementation of intelligence. So I'll show you really quickly. I'll share my desktop really quickly here. So this is the Henry Larson. This is the largest ship that they have on the fleet for the Canadian Coast Guard. And it costs millions and millions of dollars to operate this ship, and when it leaves the dock and staffing all the people and all the resources required to have the ship go out. It is a big undertaking. And when you're saving people, there is no cost involved. The amount of resources that are required to save people, it's something that is of a benefit, right? And so what the Canadian Coast Guard wanted to do was not only save costs, but be more precise in terms of the services and resources that are required to help save people and to help better understand the scenario that occurs when the ship goes in distress. And so the whole availability, and we talked about this previously, is how do we do this when you're 3 hours out at sea and there's no connectivity? We have actually tested satellite connectivity on this, and in the scenarios of open water, there are some challenges with a device that's that small to have that type of connectivity for the availability of reporting back data on a ship that's in distress or individuals that are in the water. So what the team at Indro, which is the third-party company that we partnered with, and us, we worked on behalf of the Canadian Coast Guard to understand, can we make drones self-aware? Can we make them identify when a life jacket is in the water, and that would be our trigger, and then at that point capture all the environmentals and do a rudimentary calculation in terms of, is this individual that's in the water in jeopardy of losing their lives because of hypothermia? And so this was the 5,000 hours of training that we did, different colors of orange life jackets, different times of the day, different weather patterns, rain, sun, snow, whatever that may be, the availability of the altitude of where the drone would fly, all this being captured and making the drone aware, okay, the life jacket is seen there. This is the implementation I would move forward with for this deployment. So this is not your traditional IoT solution. This is something that was built out on an ask in terms of, is this even possible? This is one of the proof of concepts that I talked about earlier in terms of getting your hands dirty and really embedding yourself into an opportunity deploying on IoT. So what I'm actually going to showcase to you is how we actually invoked edge computing on this device or on this drone to make that understanding of, hey, this is the situation or opportunity that's occurred and how to address it with machine learning and specifically custom vision. So to get started, here's my platform here. And obviously I'm not going to be able to show you the coding of the drone specifically because, it's something that's going to be hard to fly in my home office here. But what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to port the solution over to a retail scenario. I'm going to do this on behalf of a hardware shop, and the hardware shop is called Tailwind Traders. And I'm going to use the same architecture that we used for the drone to be self-aware on life jackets to do a detection of different types of hardware that's available that, one in retail would go forward and do it's an inventory count to ensure that they have the proper amount of inventory made available for their customers. So in regards to our first starting point, we're going to go to Custom Vision AI, and we're going to use this workbench to start teaching Azure services the differences between different types of hardware or different types of tools. So we're going to go forward and add a hammer. And so, you look at the screen, what a hammer looks like. We've been taught from a very young age, hammers have this blunt object at the front and a long handle at the end that I will grab onto to whack at a nail or whatever I'm hammering into with this device. And so we import all these images and we take the images and we label them hammer. And then we add another tool. Everybody knows that this is a wrench. But we have to teach Azure services that this is a wrench. And so it's that availability now of labeling the two objects in terms of what they are, the hammer and the wrench and what have you. Once we've added all the images that we wanted to train the model with, you go forward and do a train exercise to go through, and this optically, Azure services will go through, custom vision services will go through and understand the different shapes, the different, makeups of the tools themselves to really have an understanding of what is the difference between a hammer and a wrench in this specific test. In regards to its outcome, as you can see, the recall is very high. It's at 96%, and the recall is, the identification of the labeling of the tools that were put forward in terms of the solution being made available in regards to, I now, in terms of Azure services, understand the difference between what a hammer and a wrench is, right? 96% is very high. We've only got 2 objects that are in there. Usually the recall rate is around anywhere from 70 to 75%, based on the amount of objects that you put in there. Obviously, the more objects that you put in, the lesser the recall. There is a cutoff point, even for the images. You can feed as many images as you want, but the predictability of what hardware is what lessens when you add more or additional different objects in respect to understanding the differences between the objects themselves. So the recall at 96, that's actually really good, and that's something that I'm now going to take in terms of this learning and export it. So in the case of the drone, we had the availability to export the learnings that was made available as a Docker file and actually operate that Docker file right on the drone itself. So all the logic pertaining to the identification of the life jackets was run inside of a container on an IoT device on the edge. And that IoT device had the intelligence now to make the deduction in terms of, is this individual in the water in jeopardy or not of losing their life? In this scenario here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to make this as an open source solution, and I'm actually going to deploy the logic as an Onyx file. And in an Onyx file, it's, again, all the logic that's based on what was learned in the difference between a hammer and a wrench. But the beauty of this is the injection of this Onyx file or this learning file into a plethora of solutions that are out there is so simple. And so taking the same learnings or same logic that we did with drone, I'm actually going to export this Onyx file, and I'm going to bring it into my Unity workbench. And so now with my Unity IDE, I'm going to take the logic file that we just created in terms of the differences between a hammer and a wrench. And I'm not going to make a drone self-aware. What I'm actually going to do is I'm going to make HoloLens self-aware. Now, a lot of you will look at this and say, oh, great, HoloLens, that's not really an IoT device. What I've done in this specific exercise is I've made the HoloLens become an IoT device. And not only that, I've actually made the HoloLens self-aware in terms of the identification of 75 objects without connectivity based on the cameras that are inside of the HoloLens itself, and given the ability for object recognition from the device itself just by looking at specific objects. So I'll show you that example. And if you're interested in replicating this or manipulating the code, and here's my repo specifically that has all the projects that I've completed, aka.ms/wireless life, for you to go forward and test out the code set. This implementation, as I'll show you in just a second, has been used in a plethora of solutions as well. So again, the architecture doesn't just require a HoloLens for this type of enablement. You could use any device pretty much that allows for the ingestion of Onyx files in terms of the code for the logic set in terms of identification of the devices or what objects it's looking at right now. So we'll go forward, and this is me walking around in my backyard with my IoT device. I'm looking at my basketball. It comes up at 82% that this is a basketball. I'll walk around further, and 100% this is a soccer ball or football. I think in Sri Lanka you call it football. I'll walk into my house, and here's my piano. And this is, again, based on the logic that we fed into Custom Vision, exporting it into an Onyx file, fed into my HoloLens without connectivity. So this is on the edge computing, the HoloLens itself, understanding what it's looking at my laptop, looking at my mouse, and that whole availability of understanding the objects that I'm looking at the edge without any connectivity. Now, if HoloLens is not an option for you, there are devices that are out there that make that availability something that can come to fruition outside of the cost of a HoloLens, because HoloLens is very expensive. So these devices here, I believe they're $160 US. This is the Azure Connect unit. So if you had an Xbox 360 or even an Xbox One, there used to be a peripheral called a Connect, which was a sensor bar that would allow you to embed yourself as a controller in playing games on Xbox. They've now taken this technology and they've shrunken the solution to make it available as an IoT offering. So you would take this device, connected to a Nano Jetson, connected to a Raspberry Pi, connected to any micro CPU that you're implementing, and your output from this IoT device or, well, in essence, it would be a dummy device because it would connect to an IoT device as a receptacle to ingest data. You have the ability to optically see objects, via infrared see objects, see through light, dark, the availability of importing of all this data. So again, using the same solution I just showed with the HoloLens, but replacing the HoloLens with this device connected to a mini CPU, having the availability to understand and digest the data that it's looking at. So if you want more information on this device, it's aka.ms/Azure Connect DK, which stands for Developer Kit. This again is a plug-and-play unit that plugs into your IoT device to capture this type of information, which, again, taking the solution that we made available with the drones and the life jackets, an organization in Australia has taken advantage of this same architecture and are using this scenario to understand the moisture levels in soil in crops. And they've actually automated their irrigation solution, again, based on the drone solution from the life jackets. They'll have these drones fly over farmers' fields and ingest the data of moisture or moisture levels for the crops themselves and automate the irrigation process in terms of these are soybeans or this is corn or these are certain type of crops that require watering or certain levels of moisture, and automate the solution in terms of the watering of these crops based on the learnings that we did in the architecture that we did with the life jacket scenario. Now using that same IR technology to understand, okay, so the moisture levels are such, and I'll need a certain amount of water to make sure that the moisture level is at an appropriate level for these soybeans to grow accordingly.